Hello everyone and welcome to Fiction Friday. Today we're taking a break from fantasy and diving into some science fiction. Our story follows an unlucky fellow named Mickey who meets a grim stranger named Marcellus during his search for a gangster's missing pet. I hope you enjoy it. The boss was going to kill him. Mickey tore at his long greasy hair as he looked one last time around Fluffy's room. There were plastic toys shaped like rats and birds littering the floor, holes from Fluffy's venom in their sides. Some kind of special sand trapped the stink from the cat snake's box. A full-sized bed, nicer than the one in Mickey's apartment, sat empty in one corner. The only sign that Fluffy slept there were long white hairs on the cover, mingled with an occasional scale from the creature's tail. And it was a creature. Half long-haired cat and half snake, its forelegs ended in sharp claws. It had a reptilian tail, yellow eyes, and fangs. It was like a little kid's nightmare come to life. Yet to see the boss with that thing, you'd think it was the sweetest kitten on the planet. Mickey shuddered. "Come on, Fluffy, old pal," Mickey whined to the empty room. "Don't do this to me. If you come out, I'll get you a nice juicy mouse to play with." The silent, empty room mocked him. There was no choice but to accept that somehow he'd allowed the most dangerous gangster on the planet's pet to escape. How could it have happened? The door was locked when Mickey went home last night. He was sure of it. Only Mr. Strange and Mickey had keys to the room, and he'd sooner suggest the sun vanished from the sky than hint that the boss had let Fluffy escape. Damn casinos. If Mickey had only stayed out, he wouldn't have gone into debt, and if he hadn't gone into debt, he wouldn't have ended up working for a maniac like Mr. Strange. Now he had to tell the boss his beloved pet had gone missing. Mickey feared his life had reached its end. Come on, don't give up. Think like a cat snake. How would Mickey escape from this room, assuming the door was locked? He turned a slow circle and found the room just as devoid of clues as it had been the last time he looked. "Come on, you mutt," the guard outside shouted. "Mr. Strange is waiting." "Just a second." "Think, Mickey, think." He tossed toys aside in his frantic search. One of them squeaked when it hit the wall and rolled into a shadow beside the bed, out of sight. Mickey scrambled over and reached for it. Ow! He yanked his hand back and looked at the burn mark on his skin. Fluffy's poison left burns like that. He shoved the bed aside to let in more light. The little monster had melted a hole in the wall. Ha! Mickey hadn't done anything wrong. Fluffy just wanted out. The boss couldn't blame him for that, right? Mickey calmed his racing heart and walked to the closed door. The guard, a 6'6" gorilla in a blaster-resistant black suit, glared at him. "Where's the rat?" "Fluffy escaped. Burned a hole in the wall with his poison." The guard's eyes nearly popped out of his head. "It's gone?" Mickey nodded. He knew just how the guard felt. A hand as big as a frying pan wrapped around Mickey's neck. "You're going to be the one to tell him. Let's go." The goon half-dragged Mickey down a long empty hall to Mr. Strange's office. The door, an impenetrable steel model that would stop a blast from a laser cannon, was closed. "I got Mickey, boss," the guard said through the intercom. Something beeped and the door slid open, revealing Mr. Strange's austere office. The only contents were a table with a large monitor in the center and a pedestal holding a pet bed for Fluffy. Mr. Strange stood up from behind his desk, revealing a massive frame that dwarfed the guard. Rumor was the boss had Thunderchild blood mingled with human. This was never spoken within range of his hearing, as the last person to mention it got his skull crushed between the boss's palms. He wore a fine white suit that would have made a nice tent for one of the street kids. He bared blocky teeth in a grimace. "Where's my Fluffy?" Mickey tried to answer, but the words stuck in his throat. He coughed and tried again. "Escape, boss." "What?" Mickey flinched. Fluffy used venom to melt a hole in the wall and snuck out. Mr. Strange stomped over from behind his desk, grabbed Mickey by the neck, and lifted him 3 feet off the floor. How did this happen? Heat rose in Mickey's cheeks as he tried to draw a breath to explain. The room spun and spots appeared before his eyes. He pointed at his throat and Mr. Strange dropped him. Crumpled on the ground, Mickey gasped for air. "I don't know how it happened. Fluffy was sleeping when I left last night, and when I got here this morning he was gone. You must have done something." Fluffy would never leave me. I didn't, boss, I swear. Maybe something drew him outside. A bird or a desert fox, maybe. Mr. Strange waved a hand. Doesn't matter, Micky. I'm going to post a reward for Fluffy's safe return. If someone other than you brings him back, you're dead. He was your responsibility and you blew it. Find him or die. The door slid open behind him and Micky rushed out as fast as his skinny legs would carry him. Find Fluffy or die. The boss sure knew how to motivate a guy. Marcellus watched the bustle of the spaceport from his seat at the Blast-Off Cafe. The place got its name from the rocket fuel they called tea rather than the proximity to the launch zone. Hundreds of species streamed by through the morning heat on their way to work. Port Mercy attracted a motley collection of sentients, no question about that. Humans like Marcellus made up the largest group, but not by much. Humans were a plague on the universe. If they all disappeared, it would be a blessing. A vibration rattled the umbrella shading his table as a boxy freight hauler wallowed its way into orbit, the bright blue of its engine nearly invisible against the clear sky. He watched the ship until it grew too small, sighed, and took a sip from his half-empty mug. The bitter flavor drew a grimace. He'd been getting his morning cup of tea here every morning for the past 6 months, and they still forgot the extra sugar. Marcellus set his mug back on the small round table and picked up his tablet. He swiped across to the HyperNet browser and went to the jobs board. The information should be posted by now. The manual labor listings were the largest by far, but he ignored them. Even in this day and age, with mechanical load lifters, anti-gravity sleds, and power armor, the merchants still needed strong backs for small jobs and smaller pay. Greedy bastards. No thank you. Miscellaneous should have what he needed. He tapped the link and the first listing showed an image of a pointy-eared ball of fur the size of a cat, with a long serpentine tail and evil yellow eyes featuring vertical slits. The listing claimed the creature, Fluffy, had gone missing 12 hours ago, and his owner, Hugo Strange, was offering a 1,000 credit reward for his safe return. Marcellus grinned. So Strange had finally noticed a little rat escaped. Excellent. The crime boss was a perfect example of why many other species despised humans. Despite that, the decent thing to do was return the little monster to his master's loving arms. He downloaded the contact information, switched the tablet off, and slipped it into his carry-all. Marcellus dropped a 10 credit coin on the table and headed for home. A 5-minute walk brought him to his dump of an apartment building. It was the kind of place people walked past without giving it a second look, which made it perfect for him. He took the lift to the 3rd floor where his 1-bedroom apartment waited. The bell chimed and the door slid open. Out in the hall, standing in front of his door, trying to peer through the tiny camera that let him screen visitors, was his nosy neighbor. "Can I help you, Mr. Crumb?" Marcellus asked. The withered and shrunken old man had to be at least 90. He spun, nearly toppling before catching himself with his cane. "Ah, Marcellus, just checking to see if you'd gotten home yet. Did you enjoy your tea?" They forgot the sugar again. Marcellus stalked to the door and slipped inside. "Good morning, Mr. Crumb." "Could I?" Marcellus shut the door before he could ask to come in for the 1,000th time. Of all the things Marcellus valued, his privacy was at the top of the list. His line of work demanded it. He flipped the light on, revealing the painfully neat room. He studied everything as he walked to his workbench. The bed was still perfectly made. No marks on the patches of dust he'd left here and there. Not a thing out of place. No lingering odor from an intruder. Good. Some people might think Marcellus paranoid, and they'd be right. In this universe, there were paranoid people and fools. Marcellus was no fool. On the 3rd shelf of his bookcase, a black cage took up most of its length. A white bundle of fur lay in the center of the cage, a scaled tail poking out through the gap in the wire. "Well, Fluffy, ready to go see Daddy?" The ball of fur didn't stir. Should he contact Strange now and arrange a meeting? No, it was too soon. Better to stroll over to the slums and pretend he captured the thing there. Strange was one of the few people he'd met that had a wider paranoid streak than his. Marcellus draped a cloth over the cage and took up his burden. An hour's walk across town, then another couple rummaging around their run-down shacks should be long enough to make it realistic. He grinned and set out. Marcellus couldn't wait to see the look on Strange's face when he returned Fluffy. It should be something. Micky spent most of an hour studying the fortress's schematics in the computer room, sweat dripping down his face and a dull headache throbbing behind his eyes from the constant whir of the server racks. The wall behind Fluffy's bed led to a ventilation duct which gave the creature access to the entire fortress as well as the external vents. The stupid thing could literally be anywhere. How was he supposed to find it? A deep breath steadied his nerves and he turned back to the plans. There was nothing in the fortress to interest Fluffy. If there was, he would have broken out long before now. That meant whatever caught his attention had to be outside. Assuming that, Micky needed to check the vent nearest Fluffy's room. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and hustled out of the computer room. 5 minutes later, Micky thrust the fist into the air. Fluffy had melted through the grill covering an external vent. Where did he go after that? The vent was 10 feet off the ground, not enough to be a problem for Fluffy. Micky studied the ground and found some scuff marks that might be tracks or might be nothing. Micky's old man had taught him how to count cards and throw a sucker punch, not how to hunt. Oh well. It wasn't like he had so many clues that he could ignore the marks. Mr. Strange had already put up the reward. Half the city could be out looking for Fluffy for all Micky knew. He trailed along behind the tracks until they stopped at the outer wall. Scratch marks from Fluffy's claws indicated he climbed over. Micky grimaced at the thought of the little fuzzball out in the slums. There were some desperate beings living there. Many of them wouldn't think twice about bashing Fluffy and roasting him for dinner. If anything happened to the boss's pet, then heaven help Micky. After making a note of where the tracks ended, he jogged around to the main gate where the guards let him through. "Happy hunting," one smartass said as the others laughed. Micky flipped them off and ran around to where he figured Fluffy crossed over. Sure enough, he found more marks like those inside. He'd always cursed the sand that blew out of the desert and into everything, but today it was going to save his life. The first shack, a sloping one-room building made of scavenged metal and the remains of 3 pallets, sat a third of a mile from Mr. Strange's fortress. The last time some poor slob built closer, 3 of the boys went out with flamethrowers and evicted him. Or more precisely, let the wind spread his ashes. No one else had gotten that close again. The tracks meandered through the shacks, sometimes disappearing for a few yards and giving Micky a heart attack before reappearing. Fluffy seemed to have some destination in mind, but where that could be he had no clue. A faint breeze carried a hint of smoke and roasting meat. Micky's heart sank. Someone was eating Fluffy. He made a note of where he was and ran toward the cookfire. 3 withered humans, their skin baked to leather by the merciless sun, sat with a thick-skinned native beside a rotating spit. A Fluffy-sized chunk of meat dripped juices on the fire and made Micky's mouth water. He clenched his jaw. This was not the time to be thinking about food. The 4 would-be chefs glared up at him and shifted to block access to the spit. One flashed a curved, serrated knife. Micky threw his hands up. "Easy, fellas. I was just wondering if you'd seen a white furball with a snake's tail around here." After a grumbled conversation, the man with the knife said, "Seen it this morning. Too quick to catch. Had to settle for desert rat." A 10-ton weight lifted off of Micky's chest. "Whereabouts?" The spokesman's eyes narrowed and his lips curled into a smile. "How much?" Nothing was ever free, even out here. 10 credits? The native muttered something in his native tongue that reminded Micky of fingernails on slate. The spokesman nodded. "Each." 40 credits? That was nearly all the coin he had on him. But what the hell? He was seriously low on options. Micky fished around in his ragged jeans, pulled out 2 20-credit coins, and tossed one of them to the guy with the knife. They eyed the second coin, but Micky shook his head. "Where?" "Bingo's warehouse," the spokesman said. "The one in the front or the back?" "Back." Micky sighed a breath of relief. Bingo never went in the back warehouse anymore. It had too much crap in it. The hunters didn't seem to have arrived in the slums yet. Maybe he could grab Fluffy and get back before anyone showed up. He tossed in the second coin and jogged toward the warehouse. With any luck, Fluffy hadn't gotten crushed by Bingo's junk. If anything happened to the little guy. Micky shuddered at what the boss might do. The flickering hologram above the entrance read, Bingo's Odds and Ends. For a while it had said Bingo's Miscellaneous, but after enough people told Bingo he had it misspelled, he gave up using big words. The fenced-in yard held 2 warehouses that resembled giant versions of the shacks the locals lived in. There wasn't a door or wall that was square, and a haze of exhaust and lubricant fumes hung over the fenced-in yard. Micky had no interest in arguing with Bingo this morning, so he swung around back and climbed the fence. The back warehouse's door hung by a single hinge, so getting in wouldn't be a problem. First, he needed to figure out if Fluffy was still here, or for that matter, if he ever was. He circled around, hoping to find tracks or something. Underneath an open window, he found tracks. Human ones. Looked like the competition was ahead of him. That it might be a thief never entered Micky's mind. Unless he was into scrap metal, there was nothing in the back warehouse worth stealing. The windowsill was 3 feet over his head. Micky gathered himself and sprang. His fingers brushed the lip before he came crashing back to earth. Cursing all the hours he spent sitting in the casinos instead of exercising, Micky backed up to get a running start. He sprinted toward the wall, leapt, and caught the ledge with an inch to spare. With much grunting and swearing, Micky levered himself up and in. He didn't care if Bingo caught him leaving. No way was he going out that way. The inside of the warehouse was as full as Micky remembered. Heaps of metal and pipes mingled with the remains of dozens of hovercars, none of which had run and the universe knew how long. It was a maze, and Fluffy could be anywhere. It was too dark. Aside from a few shafts of light from the windows, it might as well have been night in the warehouse. Here, Fluffy. Micky made the kissing noises Mr. Strange used when he held his pet. Something shifted toward the middle of the building and a piece of metal clanged to the floor. Fluffy? Micky pushed his way through the junk, heedless of the sharp metal scratching his arms. Halfway to where he heard the crash, a bright blue flash filled the warehouse, then vanished just as quick. Micky might not be a fighter, but he had seen enough blasters fired to recognize the muzzle flash. If someone had shot Fluffy, best not to think about it. He kept pushing until he spotted a figure hunched in the dark, a box of some sort beside him. The man, at least Micky assumed it was a man, spun and leveled a small blaster at him. Micky's hand shot toward the ceiling. Don't shoot, don't shoot. The reward's mine, a hard, deep voice said. You found Fluffy? Micky's moment of relief lasted until his gaze shifted right and he noticed the body lying beside the stranger. He tried to swallow and failed. Like I said, the reward's mine. Give me any trouble and you end up like the son of a bitch over there. Is he dead? Micky asked in a small voice. Are you nuts? I'm not going to kill someone over an oversized white-haired rat. I just stunned him. Now get lost, I've got credits to collect. The man picked up the box beside him and Micky saw it was draped with a cloth or something. As his competitor turned toward the door, Micky thought fast. He'd managed to save some credits this past year. He hated to part with them, but he hated to part with his head even more. I'll give you $1,200 if you let me bring Fluffy in. A shaft of light flashed across the man's face as he turned back, giving Micky a look at the coldest gray eyes he'd ever seen. Why? 'Cause looking after Fluffy is my job, and if I don't bring him back, Mr. Strange is going to kill me. 2,000. Micky choked. He didn't have 2,000. 1,500 is every credit I have in the world. I'm begging you, man. Can't you help me out? For a moment, Micky feared he might walk out, but finally a sharp nod. Deal. The stranger set the box down, pulled out a tablet, and tapped the screen several times. Micky dug out his own pocket computer and called up his banking information. It took a second for the systems to connect before a pair of painful taps transferred his life savings to a complete stranger. He didn't even have a name, just a string of numbers to identify the transaction. The stranger started to walk away when Micky asked, Why'd you cover Fluffy up? I thought you were this thing's caretaker. Don't you know they go quiet if you put them in a closed, dark space? They think it's a den. How do you know that? Micky grimaced at the thought of someone knowing more about his charge than he did. When I take a job, I research it. So long. The man stalked off through the debris, somehow not making a sound. Micky hurried over and peeked under the cover. He saw white fur and a patch of scales and let out a sigh. Let's get you home. Marcellus grinned as the keeper hurried right past the gate guards. They let him through without a second thought, just like he'd hoped. From his perch on the roof of one of the shacks not far from the edge of the city, he could see the entire fortress. All that remained was to watch Strange's reaction to the return of his pet. He dug the tablet out of his carry-all and fired it up. He connected to the camera he'd hid in the cage, and a black screen appeared. The keeper's hurried footsteps came loud and clear through the tiny microphone. So far, so good. For 10 minutes, Marcellus stared at the black screen, completely still, ignoring the sweat trickling down his neck. If any of the locals noticed him sitting on one of their roofs, they had brains enough not to make a fuss. At last the screen went white. The camera adjusted and Strange's ugly, blocky face appeared a few inches away. "What the hell is this?" Strange asked. "Where's my Fluffy?" "I don't..." Marcellus activated the speaker and interrupted the keeper's terrified excuse. "Solomon Sane is waiting to greet you in hell." His message delivered, Marcellus punched the detonate command. A 1-pound ultra-high explosive charge blew the fortress to so much rubble. A quick note to Saint's widow, along with a copy of the recording, should see the 500,000 credits deposited to his account within the hour. Easy money. Marcellus hopped down from the roof and set out for his apartment. He needed to clean up his gear and get off planet before any of Strange's lackeys started asking questions. People streamed past him to watch the flaming debris rain down on the sand. It was a good day when he could eliminate a piece of human trash like Strange. His route took him past the warehouse where he'd handed the bomb off to the keeper. He'd hardly taken a step past the fence when something tugged at his pant leg. He looked down into the yellow eyes of Strange's rat. He must have still had a trace of the pheromone he'd used to lure it out on his shoe. The little thing mewed at him. "You want to come with me?" he asked. It mewed again, and Marcellus tapped his chest. Fluffy crawled up his pant leg and settled on his shoulder. A tiny forked tongue tickled his ear. Having a pet might not be so bad. We'll definitely have to get you a new name, though. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Fiction Friday. If you'd like to check out more of my fiction, you can find links to all my books at jamesewisher.com. If you enjoyed today's story, please leave an offering to the algorithm by liking, commenting, and subscribing. Until next week, goodbye.